Uh, Now we're moving into back in time, February 1978, and this one really kind of was about me winning my second classic, the first angler to win back-to-back Bassmaster Classics. And one of the interesting things about this picture is that this was Gene Mueller. He was the first media guy that ever told me if I ever said a certain thing in a press conference again, all the major newspapers in the country, the big ones, were never going to print a word about me. We became very good friends after that. And it was basically in the 1977 press conference. Oh, no, it's actually this year where we had a press conference. George Bush Sr. was there, and Ray Scott had asked me, what do you, how come you're always so positive? And I made the statement in a press conference with all the media there. And this was the first time we ever had the big guys with us. Gene was with the Washington paper. We had the New York Times there. We had the Chicago, the big time papers. But before then, we really had a lot of papers, but they really weren't what we called big national newspapers. And anyway, but Gene, I drew in this particular tournament. We actually did, and they take me. And I basically stated that I don't read newspapers because they're nothing but a negative bunch of crap. And they met me outside after that press conference, and that's when Gene basically said, if you ever say that again, and publicly, then we're not going to, media's not going to give you any press anymore. And I'd simply said, well, did I say anything that wasn't true? And he said no, because really I was just pointing out that how much negativity was in the news, and that's why I didn't watch it. I actually said I only read the comics and the sports page. I don't read any other part of the newspaper. But you see, Gene's actually, the writers back then were allowed to fish in the Classic. They'd get a little bit of money. And he caught this fish. And here's a very thing I've noticed about myself, commonality. My mouth's open. When I'm surprised, my mouth's open. And I'm not necessarily talking. And there in 1990 now, we finally get to 1990 when I won the Classic. That last shot that was on the cover, my mouth's going to be wide open just like it is here. So I just, strange what I noticed. But this is the Classic I won. And let me see, why did I put that little tag there? I don't see it, so I'm not going to say anything about it. But we'll get to the Classic here in a second. Okay, there's got to be something interesting in this one, or I shouldn't have put the little... Oh, this is what I did. So all of our boats were evolving back then, our bass boats, and speed was becoming more and more important. In other words, even in this is again 1978, bass boats set 4 speed records. They started racing bass boats just to see what the top speeds were. And this was with 175 horsepower. But the boats were basically, back then, were Hydrosports, Allison Craft, and all these guys that designed those boats were ex-boat racers. And but one of the irony was about all the Tennessee boats were pretty much made off race boat hulls. But there was a fallacy in that. How do you get speed? You get speed by making the hull as light as possible. Well, one of the first tournaments of this year, was on Toledo Bend. And Toledo Bend was full of stumps. And all these bass boats came to Toledo Bend, and 75% of them after 2 days of practice were damaged because of knocking holes in those thin hulls. So that had to change. They had to add more weight to those boats, and they did. And so they got better in that respect. But in that respect, those fast boats, they have to weigh, can't weigh very much, but they also can't take because back then we weren't necessarily running fast. We were just idling over logs to get back into areas because Toledo Bend was an inundated forest. and just island over stuff would punch a hole in them. And here's Bagley Clunn one again, running a commercial. Again, I become a, you know, people that are, you know, up until, like I said, the year before when I won the Classic in '76, nobody ever heard of you, and now you become an overnight expert, and everybody puts you in a commercial. I swear I'm going to get more interesting here. Yeah. Anyway, this is actually the Classic that I won. It was on Lake Toho in Florida. Now, it threw us all a curveball. And this is the one Classic that I basically, everybody said, well, how'd you win it, Rick? And I said, I got lucky. I was the least worst of anybody there. And that's true, because they held us in the morning during the fog. Again, this is another one of the Classics. Under today's rules, I would have not won because they wouldn't even ever let us go because the fog never lifted, and finally they just let us go. And we launched in Lake Toho. And I wanted to go to Kissimmee, which meant I had to go to a lock through the lock into the Lake Kissimmee, the lower lake. I couldn't find the lock in the fog. We didn't have GPS and stuff like that back then, so you were trusting your senses. And this was terrible fog. Fog we shouldn't have been running in. Too many bad things happen in that kind of fog. And but I finally got mad because I couldn't find the lock. And I said, the next weed line I run into, I'm just going to fish until the fog lifts. And I pulled into this weed line, tied on a Floyd's buzzbait. Buzzbaits are going to be an important part of my conversation here in a few of these. And it was a Floyd's buzzer. Unlike the lunker lure that I'd won the Bass Champs tournament on Percy Priest earlier in 1977, it was a buzzbait, but it was an inline buzzbait. It was called a Uncle Buck's or a Floyd's buzzbait. About my third cast, I caught a 7.5 pounder on it. Didn't intend to fish there, and ended up having almost 19 pounds that day. Okay, and I took the lead in the Bassmaster Classic. The next day, I caught 2 fish, and the final day, where you see the picture of Gene Mueller catching one behind me, which I knew how important that fish was, I caught 1 fish, and I won the Bassmaster Classic. Pitiful. We've had some worse ones, though. I know when Kevin won at Pittsburgh, that was 13 pounds for 3 days. That was, at least I think I had 19. I had over 20-something pounds to win. But it was, and the other thing, see, this is where I was developing my patterns on impoundments. And if you recall, I was talking about in the October and the fall, I was fishing. Almost every Classic had been won in the back of a major creek on the spinnerbait or crankbaits or something. This was not an impoundment. This was a natural lake. It didn't follow those patterns. So I didn't have any better idea how I was going to fish than anybody else in this tournament. I just got lucky. Larry Nixon is the one that probably, should have won that one, but nobody caught fish that well. And here's the lock I was trying to find and go through down here. And Bill was kind of a skinny guy back then. But no, it was really bad tournament, but it was good for me. There's Larry. You can see in his face that he knows he let one get away. I'm going to show you and it was just really an amazingly tough event. And let me see, here's the weights. I had 12, this 3-day tournament, I had 12 fish for 3 days. The first day I had a 7-fish limit and I must have caught 3 the second day, but I only caught 1 the last day. Had 27 pounds, 7 ounces. And Larry he actually caught more fish than me, but that 7-pounder made the difference. That first one I caught in the morning. Like most tournaments, the big one's going to make a difference. And it was, it's an event I won't ever forget, mainly because of just the conditions and how bad they were. And I made the statements, and again, we had so many, back then press conferences were, you know, it was one of the big deals after end of every day. And this basically is how I want it and how Larry Nixon almost did. And I basically made the statement, and it's kind of, most of the time when you look back on early statements you made when you were young, you go, really, was that stupid? Actually, some of mine I'm actually still impressed with. I made the statement, don't expect to be on big fish, but that doesn't worry me because at the Classic, fishermen are like me. They won't slow down long enough to catch the big ones. And that was always my history in Florida. And finally, when I figured it out, I ended up winning one in 2016, 2019. Slow down, Rick. But we didn't have power posts back then to slow me down. And this is the other thing, that the all-time money bass leaders, this is my fourth year, I'm starting my 5th year, and I'm now the all-time money winner in the BASS. Why? Because the Classic was the big payday. And I knew that from the beginning, and that's why I've invested everything in my intelligence and my soul into winning that event. And that's why nowadays, if you look, I'm probably 5th or 6th in the all-time money winnings, even though I've been doing it 50 years. Because this Classic, I won $25,000. Well, nowadays, the last Classic we just had in Fort Worth, he won $300,000. That can eat up the all-time money winnings very quickly. And all the Classics I won, I bet I didn't win $100,000. I won 4, but you know they altogether might have been a little over 100,000. Nowadays they're 300. And this is the other thing here, and I'm just trying to give you my mindset back then. I just won 76 Classic. I just won 77 Bass Champs, and now I just won my second back. My Classic. But my mindset, I unlike some anglers, especially the young ones when they won so young, they hadn't established something. Now they'd reached their goal early in their life and they didn't know where to go. I even made the statement, despite my past major victories, Rick Clunn is not satisfied. He still has to prove I want to perform consistently over many years. Not just 1 or 2, he says. That's the true test of a professional. It's longevity and you're competing at a high level, at longevity. And I think I've got something there, but Bill that year won Angler of the Year, and I won the BassMaster Classic, and somewhere I will. Anyway, that comes later. This is the tournament at St. Lawrence River, our very first one in New York. 1,000 Islands Bass Bonanza. And it was kind of a really a fascinating tournament because the state of New York had game and fish official, ever outdoor game warden there at the tournament because they did not know if they wanted us and bass tournaments in the state of New York. And so they were there in full force to watch. And they kept coming up to me because I was kind of the hottest name at that time. And even the game warden said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I'm going to do what I do best. I'm going to fish for largemouth. And they go, you can't win here on largemouth. We don't have very many largemouth in the state of New York. I said, oh, okay. You got to fish for smallmouth. And that eventually did become true. But back then, the first day I weighed in 26 pounds of largemouth. And that same game warden and conservation guy come up to me and said, it's unbelievable. There's never been a catch of largemouth that large in the whole state. This gentleman here, about 10 anglers later, come in with 27 pounds of largemouth. Jim Rogers from Missouri. And he ended up winning the tournament. I actually didn't. And another unique thing about that catch was, I'm considered a power fisherman, but that first day catch all came on a 4-inch slider head jig with a open face spinning reel. And again, it's something that I laid the rod down when we dropped a 5-fish limit, and wrongfully so. I stood still, because I was just going to fish for a big fish with only a 5-fish limit. But I fished finesse a lot more than most people realize, and now that's what I probably should be doing more and more of again, is picking up that little Charlie Brewer slider head with a 4-inch worm on it. And this is, again, something that's, the fishing industry has always been, like most industries, they come out with a lot of gimmicks. You see gimmicks all over cars nowadays, because they all look the same anyway, design-wise, so they come up with all these bells and whistles. Well, here, this particular crankbait was made by Smithwick, and it had blinker eyes. The eyes would blink. So, is that really a possibility that would attract more fish? I'm not going to say 100%, but I doubt it. But that's what you could catch fishermen. Manufacturers were more interested in catching fishermen than whether their lures would catch the fish. So they were constantly coming up with, and all these issues, almost all the way back to when I started doing back in time, have those gimmicks in lures. And one of them was aquasonic. A lot of people think it's a sound, but it was the way they put holes in the bait for the water to go through inside the bait and then bubble out of the back of the bait. They put places in them where you could insert aspirins, because you know what an aspirin's going to do in the water. It's going to fizz. So yeah, I was very conscious of that, and then all the different scents that eventually came out over time. And can you say that they're not legit? You can't say 100% they're not unless you truly understand the way a fish uses his sensory abilities. And they probably wouldn't have a sense of smell if they didn't use it. But how do they use it? You know, it's ultimately always going to be a thing that has to be proved. Of course, this was always the thing, too, that Ray kind of had to deal with, and Harry and Charlie's making kind of fun of it, because we fish a lot of our tournaments on Sundays. And Harry haven't seen you boys in church lately, Reverend Potts said. So it's, yep, that was always an interesting part of fishing tournaments, was, you know, we were fishing on Sundays. Of course, my belief is kind of like a little girl's belief that God is not everywhere, He is anywhere. So what more beautiful place could you find Him than out in the middle of a lake?
Little girl.
Anna.
And?
And that's all I'm going to tell you.